Um, there, welcome, Marcella. We're just starting with introductions. So if you want to tell us about yourself, you're on the big screen and hopefully we can hear you without a problem.
Let's see, can you hear me? Fantastic, awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for your patience. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So my name is Marcella Kepic. I am joining you from over the seas. So thanks so much for incorporating me and being patient. I am excited about the presentations and my wonderful co-presenters. So thank you so much.
Great. And so we have a small group with us here. I just realized we need to pull up the PowerPoint, do a screen share, all these things you don't think about. Do you want to do that? And I'll talk a little bit more. Sure. We thought we would start by explaining a little bit about what brought us to this topic. And I think I've done a bit of soul searching to get to a point of understanding why my interest is in this topic. It does affect me personally, being a mother. I have a 2 and a 4-year-old, but I've recently come to the realization that in doing this research, I hope to find a solution for my problem. Thinking that, because typically, right, something comes up with a client or otherwise, I dive into the research, I find all these great tools, problem fix, move on with life. Not really so pretty. But the more that I read and learn about this topic and who we are and what we're bringing, there doesn't seem to be a solution. Like this is something, working motherhood has been a long-term problem. And I think what we'll talk about today is that it's kind of just amped up in intensity with COVID. So looking at some aspects of that, Marcella will close out with some great suggestions, tools, kind of a counselor's perspective. So there are some answers, they're just more developmental in nature than solution, I would say. So that's what drew me to this topic. Amber, do you want to just leave the chair?
Yeah, we can.
The hot seat.
Yeah, we can move to the hot seat. All right. So I was so excited to be a part of this topic. I am also a working mom of a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, and have really found the juggling act, so to speak, to be rewarding, but also quite difficult, frankly, especially over the past 18 months or so with the pandemic. So this topic is also near and dear to my heart, and it's been really a pleasure to kind of dive into the research and the literature that is out there right now to see how we can use the information that we have to inform what we do in our own homes and to help clients and students toward health and wellness goals of their own. Would you like to share anything? I mean, you can. We'll just play musical chairs here briefly.
See, now I knew this was going to be so much fun. And again, I'm Christina Dukes. I am a late student in the counseling field. I started in 2015 to pursue my master's, and I'm now in the PhD program. Before that, I was a corporate woman and then became a corporate working mom of, I had 4 kids at the time. My youngest is now 18 and she's going to be moving away in September. So this topic really connected with me. So when I read about it and Dr. Herman Turner presented this opportunity to me, I was so super excited. So I can't wait to share this topic with you.
Marcella,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Absolutely. So yeah, as my co-presenters mentioned, I am also a mom, single mom. I have a 15-year-old, which is totally different developmental stage, as opposed to having a toddler or a very young school age kid. However, different developmental stage, different challenges. And I am a professor at the same time, and I have a small private practice. So my research area focuses on trauma, grief, and loss. And because of the COVID pandemic, we all are experiencing some type of grief and loss. So I was very motivated to contribute whatever I can, my own personal experience and experience as a professional, as well as a mentor and educator and as a private practitioner, to really enrich us and be hopeful in these difficult times. So thank you very much.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So we'll start by talking a little bit about the impact of motherhood on professionalism. So this starts with barriers to entry. I was sharing before this presentation that I almost didn't get the job that I have now, that I love and that I am very good at, because when I interviewed for my first round of interviews, it was with two people who lead our department, and I scheduled that interview on purpose. I didn't have full-time childcare. I scheduled it during the baby's nap time. The baby woke up. So I had baby in one hand, I had the computer screen, it was a Zoom interview, and I was talking and I was doing a great job, and then baby made a sound. And it was very clear that I didn't make that sound. So then I kind of, showed them the camera and said, okay, I'm gonna now and continued with my interview. And that was not well received by one of the male interviewers. The female department chair with small children said to him, I found this out later, no, she was doing what needed to be done. Like, no, that's not okay to dock her for that. Let's look at the rest of the potential here. So barriers to entry in the workforce are often tied to childcare related work disruptions. This goes extra for parents of children with special needs, who have to coordinate multiple appointments and situations and care providers and different considerations. Maternal workforce participation is a positive thing overall, as it reduces reliance on social services, increases financial stability for families, and is personally rewarding in many cases for the working mother. However, we have some barriers to entry and also barriers once we enter the workforce, the maternal glass ceiling, so to speak. For instance, one study found that many female doctoral students were dissuaded from academia because of the timing and requirements of tenure, and that makes it difficult to raise families. So we're in some cases encountering barriers to entering the workforce and barriers once we have entered the workforce to achieving what we would consider professional success. And that, of course, looks different for every person. Despite dramatic increases in women's labor force participation in recent decades, there's still that negative relationship between childbearing and work endurance. So we see a pattern of women dropping out of the workforce, and we see that, as Katie will talk about later, happening more the past year and a half due to the pandemic. So when we think about work and home life, often we operate in separate spheres. So we have our work self and our home self. And interaction between the demands of work and home put women at a significant disadvantage. And there's a few reasons for that I'll talk about. Women in particular, research has found, report higher levels of conflict between family and household responsibilities and work responsibilities than their male counterparts. Employed women who have a child move from being perceived maybe as someone who is a clearly committed and competent working adult to mothers. And there are some implicit penalties that come along with that mother status when you add that sphere of your life. So the question becomes, how do you simultaneously operate across domestic and work spheres successfully? These conversations don't necessarily happen when groups of males get together. We have some cultural norms at play here. So beliefs about gender influence work patterns. We have a few norms in our society. We have the motherhood norm, we have the ideal worker norm, and we have the individualism norm. Those norms don't necessarily align very well for working mothers. So mothers endure often a second shift. So they might work their shift, whether it's during the daytime or during the nighttime, they work their work shift that they get paid for. They have a parenting shift. They have a household shift in some cases. So there is that underlying assumption about responsibility for childcare in many circumstances. So factors such as mentoring, workloads, division of labor in the household, they can lead to gendered differences in opportunities for women. This also leads women often in professional positions to engage in what we call bias avoidant behavior. So there is a stigma against needing to step out of work, whether it's temporarily for a pediatrician appointment or more long-term for some extended caregiving of either children or other family members. So sometimes mothers are put on that mommy track, if anybody's heard of that, where they're encouraged to take on less work or less travel or less responsibility because of home commitments. Women also sometimes engage in these avoidance behaviors, things like hiding family obligations or not taking family or maternity leave to the extent that they are allowed by law. Get into the notion of work-life balance next. So setting the stage that women are often at a disadvantage when they're trying to engage in professionalism and maintain a home life that is satisfying to them. So we hear that work-life balance term. And one of the articles I read, the authors termed that a mythical notion. Like we talk about it. Does it actually exist? So often this, for women, this includes choosing between our identities. When we think about all of the different identities that we embody, so mother, partner, leader, caregiver, counselor, teacher, mentor, along with different parts of the family life cycle or our career continuum, we shift identities through our years as we go. We are needing to try to balance. And often this comes down to feeling like we need to choose between our identities. Mothers spend more time on child's organized activities than fathers. And often this undercuts paid work time. You're choosing one identity over another. Regardless of income level, historically, women assume more household responsibilities. You are choosing one identity over another. So success is often framed as balancing work and life, which in itself is a burden of balancing it all. And this is gendered. Our norms are gendered in a way that is putting a burden on women in trying to balance all of these things. That often leads to what we have termed mom guilt, if you've heard that term. Family first in the workforce is often atypical and often stigmatized. This is more the case in some professions than others. The question becomes, am I doing enough? Anecdotally, and from what I've read in different qualitative studies where they've interviewed working moms, you hear that question asked in so many different ways. The idea of feeling like you're failing at everything. That is a theme that has come through just the articles I've read and the people I've talked with, that feeling like you never can do anything to its full potential because you have essentially splintered yourself into all of these different spheres. I put that quote up there. You can't schedule your way out of an unfair system. I have a small private practice, and one of the clients that I see, I actually see exclusively moms right now, young working moms, which is not how I intended it. It's just who found me at this moment in time. One of them has 8 children under the age of 12 and a full-time job, and is trying to run a household and is trying to parent these children and in one of our sessions, she said, I just need a better calendar. I just need a better system. I need to schedule my days in a way that works. And I'm looking at her going, you cannot schedule your way out of this. Like this is not a new planner problem. This is a life structural problem. Let's talk about getting you some help, some practical help to deal with all of these obligations and making some hard decisions and the not so fun stuff to talk about. It's easier to buy a new planner and think that will make it all better. What we need is a change in structure. We need a change in infrastructure. And I think if anything, and I don't want to step on toes of what's to come, but I think the past 18 months has really highlighted the fact that we in this country do not have a good structure put in place for working parents. And just due to mothers tend to take the burden of the household responsibility and the childcare responsibility on, we've really seen a clear social justice issue at hand. So just to touch on some family-friendly benefits or policies, these are things that are designed to facilitate that work-family balance, if such a thing even exists, and to retain mothers in the labor force, because as Christina will talk about, there are so many benefits to mothers staying in the labor force. So things like leave, paid or unpaid, paid preferably, but leave, the ability to step away and come back, supportive employers, flexible jobs, affordable childcare. Typically these things are, if you have higher levels of education and you are professionally employed, you tend to have better access to these family-friendly benefits or policies. And yet they're still lacking in many areas, although it becomes increasingly important to try to, we'll say, level the playing field, so to speak, to retain that female workforce, as Christina will talk about next. I'll let you have the hot seat here.
So yeah, we've heard Amber talk a lot about some of the work-life balance, and how many working moms do we have here with us today? Okay, I think we all have that life balance, right? I don't know in Zoom land how many, but I'm sure that that's the majority of women who are working have encountered having to try to find that balance of their goals in the workforce and how they're perceived and how they perceive themselves. So one of the things that I wanted to show was just the trend over historically, what we've seen between women in the workforce and moms in the workforce. And if you can see on the graphs, on the charts, there's been an increasing trend, an upward trend in both graphs. The one on the left is women by age. The one on the right is mothers by age of their youngest child. And I don't have a live graph to show you, but if you put your mouse, if you go to this resource, on the highest point on both graphs, you see a leveling off around the year 1997 in both graphs. And so I don't know, that might be an area of research of interest for someone, exactly why that occurred, but I do know right around that time, women were becoming known to hold COO positions in top-rated companies like Brenda Barnes with PepsiCo. And around that time, she had been with that company for 22 years as a chief executive officer. And she decided that she wanted to stop working and take care of her family, put more focus on her children, who were, I think, are between the ages of 4 and 11. And in the chart, you'll see that the women by age, they're between the ages of, I think, 35 and 44. And their youngest child is between the age of 6 and 17. So Brenda fits the mold of what you see in the two graphs. So we still see that upward trend of women celebrating positions of power in companies. One of my mentors, and I love her, love reading her stuff, is Sheryl Sandberg. She is the author of Lean In. I highly recommend the read. I think that was one of the questions on our check-in on Whova, but I did not answer that question. You're hearing me say it now. But she encourages women to pull up to the table. We are so trained to just kind of sit in the corner of the room, let the power players be who they are, but we don't understand that we are one of the power players. I was in the corporate world for 13 plus years, and I fell straight into that self-perception of not being good enough, maybe kind of hiding in the corner until I could fill everything out. But she says just pull up a seat at the table. In 2009, Harvard published a study of two groups of students. Both groups of students read the exact same scenario, the exact same story of a venture capitalist whose greatest strength was networking. I mean, they were just phenomenal networkers. But one group, the person in the story was a Heidi. In the other group, the person in the story was a Howard. Well, Heidi was seen, well, let's back up. Howard was seen as kind, as approachable, as all of these positive things. Whereas Heidi, again, just the name was different, was seen as aggressive, as power seeking, and just all of those kind of negative microaggressions that you see against women in the corporate world. So closing the gap on that perception, I looked into some studies and saw, and you'll see this particular graph shows the closing of the gap between men and women in the workforce. We're catching up in percentages. We're only like 10,000 away in this graph. So the corporate worlds, the working institutions are seeing the positives that we bring to the table, that women bring to the table. And the study suggests that women and men really aren't that different. They have similar skill sets, pro-social skills. They can go out and close a deal. They can put just as much into that work goal. However, they did notice a difference in stress levels. So if a woman's stress increased, then their support of their partner or whatever effort they were in also increased. Whereas with men, when their stress increased, that support decreased. They were unable to provide that support. So I found that interesting, and that's something that we might want to look into further in research. Working mother performance and upper management also showed a lot of reflected positive skills. I think I added everything else later, but I do want to point out that in the working mother research, there is a neuroplasticity, and Dr. Herman Turner and I talked about this yesterday. There's a neuroplasticity that occurs in a mom's brain where their emotional regulation improves, their productivity improves, right? They're able to focus and categorize and switch tasks quickly, more so than a non-mother or male. If I said that correctly. So there's a lot of research going on with that. And this is of a female working mother who does not have diagnoses of anxiety or depression, because that does change the game a little bit. So there are some great positive things that we can learn from working moms. And I'm going to move on to the next presenter, and I believe that's Dr. Herman Turner. Thank you.
All right, so we have heard some of the common struggles, barriers to women in the workforce, some of the advantages of having women in the workforce. Now I'm going to look a little bit about the craziness that has been our recent years. So I love this little cartoon that's right here because it shows a mom working in the laundry room. And at one point it talks about, well, why don't you ask your dad? And the kid says, well, he's locked in the bathroom, which I think, like, I don't, maybe it's too much. I've worked in my closet before. Like, that's a nice quiet place with a door. But sometimes it's finding a quiet place. When we did our introductions, we talked a little bit about our own experience mothering and where we are in the family life cycle, right? Family life cycle is a typical model of family progression. with COVID, different stages, different experiences. So a lot of the research we see talks about school age children, which is an important consideration. Thinking about new mothers, right? So a mother with an infant, already an isolating experience during COVID, significantly more isolating. Children under 7 years, parenting is pretty much full time, right? We try and keep our kids alive, and usually it takes somebody watching them. That is a realistic goal. Children who are a little bit older, right? Homeschooling became a thing. Parents who never thought they would be homeschooling. No, a friend of mine, she's a single mom of 4. She has a corporate job. All of a sudden she had 4 kids that she was homeschooling at the same time. So trying to manage her work life, homeschooling children who had been in public schools, been in daycare. And so a huge transition. Looking at parents of older children. So looking at boomerang children, right? Children moving back into the household as older children lost jobs, didn't have the financial support during COVID, economic hard times. Saw a lot of older children moving back into the household. So changing that system as well. So just being impacted across the family life cycle, but those impacts have looked very different depending on where somebody is. So I spent some time thinking and reading about what were the roles of moms during COVID, right? Childcare, household work, which increased, right? More people at home, more things to do, more meals. School lunches are no longer an option. As we see throughout the research, household work generally falls, regardless of income level of parents, regardless of employment, typically the responsibilities fall on the female in the households. Meals, groceries, organization, children's education. I talked a little bit about homeschooling, social emotional development, right? All of a sudden you have kids at prime developmental points in their life being completely isolated. And how do parents network that? How do they keep them interacting? How do they negotiate what's safe? I put IT specialists because I know as an avid Zoomer, and for those parents who had kids homeschooling online, right? IT and technology became absolutely paramount. Having enough technology in your household for kids that were learning online, having enough technology, having a quiet space. I know so many families, right? Let's tear everything, not literally tear everything out, but reorganize our entire house. Where can we put an office? Because all of a sudden we have 2 workers at home. How do we balance the schedule? COVID first hit us. I did a beautiful schedule. It was posted on the refrigerator. So it had 4 columns. And it was for each member of our family, right? Breakfast. And when we all came together, it was a beautiful chart, like walk time, who was working when, and hopefully nobody needed to have a meeting during our work time, but we split the days. I worked in the afternoons. My husband got the mornings, organizing naps and everything else. But it was a beautiful diagram that we aspired to live by to create some structure, because families need structure. Kids need structure, right? So creating appropriate boundaries. So these are some of the roles that we saw for moms during COVID. So what's happening, right? Isolation. If you're managing so much, you don't have time for friendship connections. Women, people are relational in nature. Women, sometimes we see them being more relational. Time for friends cut out. Time for family connections outside of your immediate family were the first thing to go, right? So you're having people who are already feeling isolated, who already need help, being more isolated from the resources. Burnout, right? A huge thing that I don't think we think enough about is at this point, we're coming out of COVID, hopefully, the way it's looking. And there's a lot of people who are just tired, like they have been running through this gauntlet and the burnout is high. Being pulled in different directions. So in that cartoon at the beginning, right? Do this, do that. And then the idea of even having children at home, they can't get themselves lunch. You're on a Zoom call. What happens? Like how do people in the family get fed when there's other things? How do you keep the children from being neglected? Which feeds back into the mom guilt that Amber was talking about at the beginning. Like, okay, I've just spent the day failing at everything. the last bullet point I have there is betrayal, and that links into the betrayal of our system, right? So some of these are not new things, they're just amplified, but looking at those historical things and a mom at this time feeling like they're set up for failure, right? I don't just need a new organizer. Like I have been betrayed by the belief that this was possible. I'm going to talk a little bit about employment versus unemployment, right? We saw a increase in unemployment, particularly in women. I have a slide on women of color in particular. So more than 10 million mothers of school-age children weren't working. A third of mothers living with school-age children, right? Very high. In spring of 2020, 3.5 million mothers living with school-age children had left active work. Part of that is because of jobs, part of that is because of obligations. We'll talk about a few of those things. So I have the why. More moms worked in service industries, right? Which we saw those being shut down, restaurants, other service industries, and then women having a higher burden. And so we see those things written about in the research. I have a few graphs. Hopefully you can see it. If you are with us virtually, I will upload this PowerPoint. So you don't have to break out your magnifying glass at this point, but I just found them to be very interesting. So this is the distribution of mothers who left their jobs due to childcare at some point in 2020. And you can see just the really high rates and making a choice, right? As that level of burnout increased, families saying we've got to find a different way, and how do we make those decisions? Okay, talked about the age of children affected. So we typically see a V-shaped pattern in women's employment levels. So employment drops during the summer when children are at home and increases during the school year. So this is a typical pattern that we saw it really magnified with COVID. Also, women teaching positions is something a lot of females move into even when they have children. I know corporate friends who have become teachers because it matches the child schedule. So this is a normal trend. It's just we see it amplified as we see needs increasing. Occupations, this is a breakdown of occupations, and you do see the higher levels in the service industry. Okay, multicultural considerations. COVID had a disproportional impact on some racial groups, right? You see the distribution and percentages down there at the bottom of unemployed single mothers by race and ethnicity. But we saw lower SES and women of color being disproportionately impacted. So this does become, something that we need to look at as far as how we can reach people, right? Where job flexibility is, where employment status is, because these are ongoing problems. A mother in the service industry typically has somebody cover the shift. I have a child who's home that's sick, whereas salaried people have a little bit more flexibility. So looking at these rates, and I think I have, this is comparing February 2021 to 2020 and the unemployment rates. I wish it went back. Well, hopefully it's going forward is improving, but looking at some of that distribution. So last slide, and then we are going to move on to Marcella, but post-COVID, right? So ideally we're moving out of COVID now. How are things different? So reentry into the workforce. We've talked about some of the barriers that Amber mentioned. These have been highlighted. So why hire a mom who's going to have to take days off for childcare? What is this long-term impact? We've heard this she-session being a term because this has affected women exponentially. Decisions of mothers, right? So the emotional burden, we have the physical burden, we have the intellectual burden, but also the emotional burden. Is it safe for my kids to go back to school? Holding back, I know a number of people were waiting to start kindergarten a year later. Is this the right environment to start a child? Mask versus no mask, right? So now a lot of places it's an option. And how do you encourage or support your child? Because there can be a social stigma associated with that choice. And so kids being bullied, like, do you tell your child to wear a mask at school or not wear a mask at school? And what does that say about their beliefs? What will that say about their friend group? How does that affect bullying? Vaccination, I put, the trials, right? Because now vaccinations are open to kids over 12, under 12. Pfizer's trial is open up to younger children. I was talking to a mom friend recently with a 3-year-old. She said, I'm going to sign my child up for the Pfizer trial. And what do we know and how do we make that decision? What does safety look like? And the emotional burden of making decisions for people other than yourself. Childcare, right? Is childcare an option? It's open back up for us. Was recently talking to a friend in Houston, and the exponential cost of vaccinated nannies, right? So she has in care inside of her home for a child, but to find somebody who's vaccinated there, now it's a hot market. The prices have gone way up if you want a sitter who is vaccinated. Marshall Plan for Moms is something that I came across. And so it's a national movement to put mothers at the center of our economic recovery system. So looking at plans similar to many European countries, things like Germany, I know for instance, mothers are paid for their mothering service, but looking at how we can change policy so that that system of feeling betrayed based on the fact that moms haven't been taken care of can be something that is looking, but they had a real push for reopening schools, paying moms for unseen work, doing things to retain women in the workforce. So there's a number of celebrities and politicians that are backing that plan right now. What it turns into, we will see. So we're seeing hopefully coming out, but the burden and the impact of this time has been great. Marcella mentioned the trauma, right? Going through an experience of trauma. And she's going to talk a little bit to us about some counseling implications. So Marcy, if you want to just give me a look and I'll change slides. Oops, you're on mute. Still on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Yes?
Yes.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for Katie for that intro and kind of leading us to grief and loss and trauma. Even though perhaps we don't see the big trauma here, but because we are experiencing a lot of disconnect, right? And what is disconnect basically? Disconnect is not having what we used to have. So the routine, the structure, the typical roles that we had on a daily basis, all of that evaporated within few weeks as everything, basically closed down and shut down. And as we continue to adjust and adapt, few months, into it, we felt like, oh my gosh, this is not what we used to, right? And our brains, if our brains are facing uncertainty and ambiguity, our brains don't like that, right? So all of that is perceived as stress, as addition to what we go through our daily lives. Now there is that extra layer of feeling stressed out, feeling disconnected, feeling like we are constantly in a survival mode, right? I have to go from this, adjust to that. Oh my gosh, now my kid is sick. My parents are over 70 years old. I cannot leave the house because I potentially might bring something into the house. And on top of that, I have to restructure all my lectures and go online. So we were bombarded by changes, and our brain, is telling us very strongly, unknown, danger. So we are shifting, to that stress mode and stress level. When cortisol's levels are constantly up, our immune system is suppressed, and we cannot function. We are very, susceptible to illnesses and diseases. We feel disconnected. We feel tired. And because we feel like that, our relationships are impacted. We have shorter fuses. We cannot sleep. We cannot handle things the way we used to. So if we are facing our neighbors, our moms, our support, our friends, and we are noticing just total exhaustion, it could be a small trauma. It's a grief. due to the loss that we are experiencing. So our role as a counselor, first and foremost, has to be there. We have to come from a validative perception and normalize all of that, circumstances and situation. That's our job. Role number one, step number one, validate and normalize. It's okay to feel stressed out. It's okay to feel like on that picture, that boy hanging off the cliff, because we are constantly grasping for some stability, which is, not happening, right? So normalize the experience of mom. We do not perhaps have the same experience. We might have something similar. So let's normalize that for our moms and our women who are really, really pulled million directions. So we can go to the next slide. Once we are normalizing and validating women's experiences, we perhaps provide a brief psychoeducation. I loved how Christy mentioned about neuroplasticity, right? Our neurons are, alive and vibrate. So what do? We are gently teach our moms or women out there telling our brain has the capacity to adjust, right? How do we do that? Well, recognize the stress response, fight, flight, freeze response, right? We need to teach our women to switch from the sympathetic dominance, which is the fight, flight, freeze response, into a parasympathetic dominance, which is more of a relaxed mode, calm mode, when the digestive system is going strong. So teach them to take a pause. Let's take a breather. Let's count to 10, right? Let's maybe do a body scan. Let's ground ourselves. Tell me 5 objects that you see. Tell me, maybe 4 things that you can hear. Tell me 2 things that you can smell. So let's work on recognizing what's happening and then de-escalating. Let's ground, let's do the body scan, let's ground ourselves, and then choose a way to respond to the environment. Well, maybe my a child needs attention right now, so let me pay attention to this, and let's put pause on all the emails that I have to do, right? And if I give that attention to my kid and be for that kid in the moment for 2-3 minutes, when I'm really connected and present in that time, my child will be able to soothe, there will be calmness, and then I can switch and pay attention to those emails that are, waiting for me. So at that point, when we are calm and not perceiving everything as danger, I can be calm and present and handle the task much more effectively. And I can choose. I don't need to yell. I don't need to have a short fuse. I can see this perspective from different perspectives. So I can see and I can talk to myself, how can I best to take this scenario and put it in a positive spin, so I feel, maybe I can do this, or I feel misunderstood. How can I switch the perspective? How can I handle this effectively, right? And then definitely ask for feedback. If I do this, how would that work in my environment? Would that help me right now? And something that I want to stress here, there is no perfect solution. Whatever we have at hand, and if we are able to approach it from calm mind and perspective, this is the best we can do in this given moment. That's all we have. We have present moment, right? So I'm going to the next slide, and I'm going to talk about how counselors, besides, teaching, our clients to recognize, to de-escalate and make better choices, how we can provide resources and constantly with women reevaluate, does this work for you? What can you do based on your experience from the past? It's not what's working for me, it's what's working for you, right? So what else can I do? How else can I be supportive or effective here? And most importantly, Katie talked about the cultural backgrounds, right? Approach each client from cultural humility. We cannot share 100% our, knowledge and skills and perceptions. We are all different. Therefore, consider your clients as an expert and ask them what's going to work for them and be supportive and validating. And my last slide is talking about promoting healthy relationships. So what works for you based on your circumstances? You have 3 kids, you have 1 kid, you have 2 part-time jobs, whatever that is, you know, do we ask for help? How can I effectively ask for help? What are some things that I can do outside of my norm, right? Can I have social support, whatever that might be, online, Zoom, social support, my neighbors, and so on and so forth? Am I scheduling some time to really de-escalate, have some fun? Because if I can recharge, I will be better for my family. Reach out and maintain friendships, tap into wisdoms of older people, and don't shy away from sharing all that burden and stories that we go through. Thank you very much. I know we are running out of time, so I guess we're going to have some time for questions.
Yeah, we do have a question slide up. We don't have much time for it, but so I'm gonna pause at our last slide, so references, but also our contact information. So I know I speak for our entire group. We are all interested in continuing to have conversations about these and related topics. We obviously feel very passionately about them. So please feel free to reach out, collaborate, connect over them. I'm gonna go ahead.